It is my pleasure to introduce our 6 panel members here. We have John Falk from the University of Arizona, fire ecologist. Bill Kaage, chief of the Fire for National Park Service. Heidi Schewel, who is the public affairs specialist for the Coronado National Forest. We have Shaula Hedwall, who is Fish and Wildlife Service, Ecological Service fire biologist. And then we also have Aaron Green, who is the district manager for Northern Arizona State of Forestry. Let's see, are we missing one? We're missing Bill Hennenberg. I guess he didn't get the memo, so this is fun. He is on a fire assignment down south. How fitting. So, great. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and each of the panel members is going to give a 1 to 3 minute quick snapshot of the topic we're going to be handling today, which is how we manage fire in the Southwest. So, did you have any preference for the order, folks? Don, take it away, and we'll just go down the line, please. Thank you. From here? Yes. Or you can stand up, whatever.
No, that's fine. I'm not sure this is on.
Let's flip it on.
Never switch. Learn something every day. How many of you were attended the 2012 AFI Southwest Conference in Santa Fe? Look at that. Okay. That's something for AFI organizers to take note of. That's good repeat customers. So I went back to the 2012 program and I made a kind of informal word cloud. This is very qualitative, and but I just wanted to see what the themes were that were present at the time. And the things that kind of jumped out in 2012 were fuel treatment options, prescribed fire, monitoring, restoration, repair, forest structure. So none of those things have gone away, but it did the same thing for this year's program. And the biggest entries that I found in the word cloud this year were resilience, tipping points, climate change, post-fire succession, hydrology, landscapes, disturbance interactions. I found this a very interesting exercise, if it means anything, because those topics from 4 years ago, of course, haven't gone away. All those things are very much in the mix. We still have to monitor. We still need bear. Forest structure is still important. Food treatments are still important. And yet, obviously, what's on everybody's mind here is something very different. Now, if you've ever served on the program committee, as I had been fortunate to do this year, nobody's micromanaging these topics, right? We don't tell people that we want presentations that have the word resilience in it. That is an emergent property of what is on everybody's mind. And I think in turn, that reflects the issues that people are facing in fire and land management. And so we didn't create this agenda. I mean, we provide some guidance, but remember the theme of the conference was beyond hazardous fuels. Well, obviously we succeeded in that. We went way beyond hazardous fuels. And so what I want to suggest is that, we can kind of use what's on your mind as an indicator of what's being faced by managers in the Southwest. They are no longer these kind of, or not only, I should say. We've transcended a lot of these issues that are very site-specific, watershed-specific, even forest-specific, and we are seeing regional challenges. A lot of them forced by top-down changes in fire mitigation, climate change. That was in the mix in 2012. It was in the mix in 2008. Obviously, right now, it's become a dominant factor, and we have every reason to believe that will continue. And then the role of resilience as a driving part of our paradigm. We organized what I believe was the first conference on fire and ecological resilience in 2014. Really not that long ago. yet now it has become a central component of our strategy. So what does that tell us? It's not that we're talking less about post-fire restoration, we still are, but resilience relaxes the imperative to return to the pre-fire historical condition. Why are we talking about resilience more than restoration? Well, we all recognize that as climate and fire regimes and disturbance interactions, things that you all have been really teaching each other a lot about, as those progress, strict sense restoration becomes more difficult to achieve. It's not that it's impossible, but there are certain places in the landscape where that's no longer part of our paradigm. So my takeaways from this meeting and the lessons for fire and landscape management in the Southwest are that we're moving toward, first of all, an environment in which the top-down drivers, particularly climate, are forcing our hand. They're forcing fire regimes and they're forcing post-fire recovery. And second, we are all collectively looking at a different set of solution space. Our desired future conditions are no longer a mirror image of historical space. In some areas they are, and of course, ecological legacies are very powerful, and they don't just go away even after a big fire. We've seen that after some big fires. But we're also seeing that our future desired condition may not resemble the historical condition in some areas. And an exemplar of that, of course, would be forest to shrubland type inversions consisting of native species, perhaps reflecting on large scales processes that used to happen on small half scale. So I see a lot of flexibility in the approaches and the ideas and the questions that are being adopted, and they seem to revolve around these more dynamic solutions, letting go slightly of historical conditions in order to achieve a landscape that's more adaptable and resilient under the climate that's to come.
Maybe they can work for both, I'm not sure. Do you guys hear me okay? So I had two questions that Barbara assigned that hopefully ties in with some of the things that Tim presented in his closeout presentation today, and then spur some discussion amongst the group overall. I was asked to come in from a Washington office level, fire management perspective, and how does science shape policy, and then the importance of managing fire, using fire to achieve resource objectives. And I'll start with the science shaping policy question first. And my boss is always a good one to say that about 99% of good ideas come from the field. And I really, truly do believe that. And if you look at what we do is from the standpoint of the basis of what we legally do under law, what we do by policy, what we do from a science perspective, and remember that tripod of factors. I think it is very important for the field, given your innovation, your creativity, your willingness to, I'll say, test policy, not violate policy, but test policy to come up with better ways of doing things is the way that policy has changed. And when you do that, it's critical for people in my position and for people like directors of bureaus. They are very data focused in their decision making, and the role of science in providing that data behind why you want to do something differently is critical. That doesn't mean that good ideas don't come from DC. I'm not saying that, but I think the ability to achieve policy change that's effective and implement at the field level, a lot of that is much better achieved if it emanates or percolates upward from the field towards regional offices, towards national offices, saying, this is a really good idea. How do we take it and make it work across our region? How do we take it and make it worse across our bureau and across the country? So you have a role in doing that, and it is science-based. It has to be science-based, data-driven, the reasoning, the why behind why you're pushing for a change. And there are a lot of tools to help you with that. I know Colleen's here, Ed's here from the Joint Fire Sciences Program. They're a great outfit tied in with the Nature Conservancy and the consortia. There's conferences like this. There's USGS and its field offices. Paul Stedline, raise your hand. The Fire Sciences League for USGS. They want to help us in management with their science, addressing our policy issues, and they're there and they're here to help us. And it doesn't mean there isn't groups like the Wildland Fire Leadership Council. We had a meeting yesterday, and it's the bureau directors, departmental leadership, representatives from National League of Cities, National Association of Counties, governors. It's not a decision-making body, but it's a very collaborative body that they were the ones who led the charge for the National Cohesive Strategy Development. And they base what their thinking is and what they take back to their departments, back to their bureaus upon science. And so you see it at that level. It's just most effective, I think, when it emanates up from the field. And then from the second question, getting to fire use, I've never heard anybody at a national level, whether it's a Hedwall or a Jarvis, Dan Ash, anyone, not be supportive of the field in terms of using fire to achieve objectives and natural resource objectives. I hear that across the board. The difficulty may be in what happens at the field level, dealing with the crisis of the moment, when you have a high degree of political concern, a high degree of public concern. And what I think Tim mentioned it this morning. I don't know, he didn't mention it early. He did mention it this afternoon as well. But what I think you have to do, recognizing that you have that support, is the importance of relationship building with your constituents, the people you represent, and with your partners. Because stuff will always go wrong. Trust me, it's gone wrong for me many times. And you don't want to be the only person standing at the microphone justifying why you did something and helping your line officer with that. You want your partners helping you with that and taking the heat and supporting you through that process. And relationship building is probably the key factor that I think often gets overlooked, but it's where it all starts from before the fire season occurs, so that people in public information, public affairs, we don't have them a pile of what to deal with when something goes wrong during an incident. You want that support across the board through sound relationships. Turn it over to you now.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so as public affairs, my job is communication. And obviously none of us work in a vacuum. So there are lots of opportunities. I provide information to, or interact with, to communicate with the public, with the news media, with elected officials, with the people who've just been evacuated from their neighborhood. There are all kinds of opportunities, and in my role as with fire, public information officer, I have the opportunity to be an educator, an interpreter, a public affairs officer, and a public information officer. So there's different hats that can be worn with different situations. Okay, now here's going to be some positive reinforcement, something you've already heard today. What you have heard. Elizabeth Reinhardt said, we need to work on public education and understanding on the use of fire on the land. She stressed the importance of collaboration and public input. Bill Van Bruggen was talking about the social implications of fire management, and he stressed that we need stakeholder, community, and cooperative support. He talked about terminology. Can we get that message in 5 words or less? Jeff Whitney, I love this. He said, if we wait to engage the communities until there's smoke in the air, we've missed an opportunity. And that is so true. A lot of people said a lot of things. I'm just going to touch on a couple of more. Brian Kelly was talking about external barriers to managing fires for resource benefits, and the number one barrier being public. He also said it's good, and I so agree, to talk about objectives and what we're doing, explain what we're doing and why. Why is probably one of the most important things that we can do. Internal barriers and external barriers, terminology. There was one more I wanted to, Jay Usher said, how are we talking to the public, talking about their movie, that's such a great idea. Jim Sexton, work with the partners and publics in advance. So a lot of it is about relationship building. A lot of what have heard here throughout this week has been that there is a need for importance in how we communicate with our different audiences. That there's a need for improvement and that it is important. And so we need to think about our communication internally and externally. We need to think about terminology and how we tell our stories. And we need to think about our communication before, during, and after incidents. Because, before is the golden opportunity. If you can get your relationships in place when things go wrong, as they will, there is some trust there, and hopefully that will be a key to keeping doors open for understanding. So I was thinking about, partners, stakeholders, elected officials, the public, people we work with and people we serve, what do they want from us? They want us to be available to talk to them. And this is all of the time. This is not just during incidents. They want us to be available. They want to talk to somebody when they have a concern or an issue. They want information up front. They don't want to be blindsided by something that affects them or that they're really interested in. They want timely and accurate information. They want respect. They want to know what's going on, what are we doing, and why. And in some cases, they may want to be involved, which is totally appropriate in a lot of cases. And then if you throw in that it's during an incident, then you get this anxiety, uncertain, anger, and fear, and it just completely shifts the arena for your communication. So again, if you have relationships in place, that's going to work in your favor a lot. Investment in time up front is well worth the return on the investment. Okay, so what do we want from them, from our partners, our stakeholders, our elected officials, our public? We want understanding, we want agreement, we want buy-in, and we want support for our work. And so I think effective communication is the key for both of those. Our communication, coming from different agencies, it can be really negative. We use lingo. We use acronyms. It's the way we talk. I've been hearing it used a lot here this week. Also, something that's not really pleasant is when we use confusing or changing terminology. Is that something we do a lot? Yes, that's something that's also been talked about here. Communication can be really positive, clear, understandable. We have opportunities to tell the story. We have opportunities to tell the truth. When we're trying to talk about fire stuff, if something's not really clearly definable, use examples. Let people see what we're talking about. Don't make them guess, and don't make them come up with their own interpretations, which may be misperceptions. Also, positive communication, some of the obvious stuff, patience, empathy, active listening, genuine interest in what their needs and concerns are. And so we've done a good job of confusing people, and we're still doing it. PNF, WFU, let burn, appropriate management response. And there's still a lot of stuff getting tossed around. People are confused. They don't know what means what anymore. They don't know what's still appropriate. So that's something that we need to work on. So I believe that effective communication is essential to our success. I think we must speak in words that can be understood by and mean the same thing to research scientists, fire management practitioners, and the average Joe on the street. And if the words and the language can't match up, then we need to know how to be good translators. We must know our audiences, we must know how to reach them and how to talk to them, and we need to look for the opportunities. Every opportunity we need to take. I can't stress that enough. And so that's all I have to say.
That was a lot. So I feel a little bit, can you hear me? I feel a little bit like the odd duck at fair, the subject that hasn't been touched on quite directly throughout most of the plenary discussions, but I'm here to represent the wildlife. So with the owl maybe instead of Kentucky bear. Ha ha. So one of the things Barb wanted me to talk about specifically was how does fire integrate into wildlife resources with climate change, unexpected events, all of the things we're trying to manage for. And I guess the way we've tried to approach that is, in a lot of cases where we are managing the most fire is not the land the Fish and Wildlife Service is charged with managing, but we do have resources that we are responsible for in those areas. So how we are trying to work with our partners to integrate those wildlife resource and values into that fire is by building those relationships and working together and having that communication up front. That's a journey that started a really long time ago, and I would argue it's taken us a good 15 years to get to the point where I feel that we have really strong relationships across a lot of the federal agencies and different partners we work with to try and ensure that wildlife habitat objectives are part of this process. Because they're a really important part. You know, we heard a lot of discussion about list your objectives, explain your objectives to the public. But one of the things we frequently do, not in all cases, I think Grand Canyon National Park is an excellent example of having data to back this up. But we say, okay, we did the fire, we had a wildlife habitat objective, we're done. And we haven't quantified that, we haven't monitored it, we haven't really figured out, are we meeting our goals and objectives for the different wildlife species that we're trying to manage for across this landscape. Some of which are listed, threatened and endangered species, that we are trying to work into building in those resilient landscapes. We don't know that we have so many information gaps in terms of wildlife and how they fit into that process and how we include that but don't impede or it's always been a careful dance around fire in terms of wildlife for meeting those wildlife objectives, making them a true priority of that fire. And that's been one of the really exciting things for us in terms of working with our partners on managed fire, is wildlife does start to rise to the top. We have an opportunity to look at reintroducing fire into Mexican spotted owl habitat, into aquatic systems, to try and build that resiliency so that they are operating much closer to the fire-adapted community system that they're supposed to represent. And we're not there yet. I think we have a long ways to go, but I think we've made a lot of progress. Planning, you know, this winter, I already have multiple events scheduled to get with people, update maps, you know, work together to try and make sure we've got the data available for people. So when fire season starts, as it typically has been now, starting in April or May, the last 4 years, and going through November, that's a long year. We've got that information available. Checking in with each other, talking about how we're going to work together, how we're going to respond to events that don't work out exactly the way we planned. That's how we're trying to make sure that fire and wildlife get integrated together into this process. Because one thing the public really does care about, besides water and ecosystem services, is their wildlife. It's really, really important to people. And the more we can show that we're accounting for that and we're providing for that habitat over time for all different sorts of species, I think the better off and the more successful we'll be.
So I'm here sitting in place for State Forester Jeff Whitney. And so I'm trying to give maybe the state perspective on where fire is moving in the future. And how the state is responding to it. And it seems to me like too often in a lot of the talks and a lot of the presentations that I saw during the past week, there was a familiar cutout of land that was just focusing on Forest Service land. But something that we're pretty excited about is fully engaging in and participating in the cohesive strategy and the all hands, all lands approach, and recognizing that there's plenty of work that the state has to do to start working and helping private landowners manage and deal with some of the resources and some of the processes on private land, including fire. And so under the new leadership of Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management and Jeff Whitney, we've really started some really good things. We're more focused on data and metrics and science, and planning, both short-term and long-term, has become a real important part of what we do on a regular basis when it didn't necessarily used to be high on our lists. We continue to do really good work for fuels treatments around communities and working with local fire departments to build capacity to fight wildland fire. It's our third year of getting funded by the state legislature to do fuels treatments in Arizona, which is a strong commitment from our politicians to continue some of the good work that we've been pushing and trying to do for a long time. As it relates specifically to fire, we've made some really big advancements over the past year or two with Arizona Forestry and Fire Management. We've implemented a new prescribed fire policy and handbook, so using prescribed fire is much easier for our districts across the state, and being able to implement fire on the landscape is a much easier part of it. And I think most importantly with that, there's a new level of support and backing for us taking action and taking the type of risk it takes to put fire on the landscape, which is definitely an encouraging change in the culture of state forestry in Arizona. We're also increasing the amount of prescribed burning that we're doing, both on state lands and on private lands. We're really trying to engage with private landowners and ranchers in the NRCDs to find opportunities to do some really beneficial burns that can increase some desired effects of wildlife habitat and some forage production in some critical areas in pinyon juniper. We're working better with our collaborators and our different agencies, and one really good example of that this year was the juniper fire, where it was a managed fire that the Tonto National Forest had success that many people have talked about during the past week, and the state engaged, where in the past we wouldn't have engaged. We went to private landowners, we got permission to bring that managed fire onto private property, and we secured that and helped assist that process in preparing for those private properties to receive that fire. That is a pretty significant change and really representative of the change in direction that state forestry is going, that we're looking for those opportunities to assist federal agencies in carrying out managed fire and having them cross boundaries, which I think is really important in the cohesive strategy and that all hands, all lands approach. Another thing that we did this year for the first time is that we had our own managed fire on private property. Out on the Baca float, we had a natural ignition. We brought in long-term fire behavior analysts, and we monitored the fire and let it burn. This is something that was pretty much outside of our fire management policy before Jeff Whitney came on board. It's made a big difference in the encouragement to put fire on the landscape. And a lot of us have new goals and new targets for the amount of fire that we would like to get to and see on the landscape, and it's really encouraging. Next, I'll just mention that we have staff working hard to adapt or to expand our Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network across the state to encourage the public to understand some of the concepts and some of the ideas that are talked about here. I think that's a really encouraging sign. Finally, I believe that we're moving to a place where fire is becoming a more common component of our ecosystems and our environment, and that the arbitrary ownership lines hopefully will become less restrictive as we move forward, as we manage fire across the landscape. And we're certainly committed at the state level to making sure that those arbitrary boundaries of state and private don't stop some of the good things that fire can do on the landscape.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you for your observations and advice. Some really good stuff. We have time now. We're going to go ahead and have a question and answer session here. So I'd encourage any questions you have, if you have it for a specific panel member, identify them and raise your hand and we'll get you the microphone. Okay.
Come on, Mark, give clear instructions. You can do it.
Thanks. Hi, so I'm really fascinated that the state of Arizona, your agency is able to incorporate the use of fire effectively. I'm from New Mexico, and that's been a real challenge for our state forestry organization. And then the other partners that we work with in Colorado, because of a bad prescribed fire outcome, basically they got their agencies split so that they've got a total fire protection agency and then they've got the forestry agency in what used to be a more cohesive approach. And I'm wondering, is there something unique about the situation in Arizona? Was your state constitutional mandates or something that allowed you to maybe be bold about using fire?
I guess I don't think that there's anything specific within our legislation. We did have an opportunity to change and develop from a division of the land department into our own Department of Forestry, and in that legislation it gave us some new authorization. But I think it is just more the leadership that we have that recognizes the importance of fire on the landscape and recognizes that in doing that there are risks, and he's willing to accept some of those risks as long as we have the policies and procedures in place. So I don't think we could have gone to where we went this fire season in doing some of those things without totally reworking our prescribed fire management plan and handbook. That started the foundation for some of the changes that are occurring in our state. So I think leadership is a big important part of where we're moving and where we're going.
As somebody that's worked with and for Arizona State Forestry, good job.
Especially for those of you on the federal side, I'm really interested. I've been watching the news very closely and very concerned about science and its place in public policy going forward. There's I have real concerns about the place of science and the place of holistic, cooperative management, such as we've been talking about all week, going forward over the next few years on the federal level. I'm expecting severe budget cuts for federal land agencies and maybe some fairly overt attacks on science in the agencies. And I'm just curious what those of you who are, especially the National Park Service, what you're anticipating. I know we can't read the tea leaves and know what's going to happen because this is all unprecedented, but how resilient do you think the agencies are to the level of attack that they may be experiencing from within coming up here?
That's a really good question. I would say, we did just a look with our budget formulation office at where we're a high water mark for budget and staffing across different portions of the National Park Service. So when we looked at law enforcement, we looked at fire, we looked at turf rangers. It varied whether that was 2009, 2010, 2011, it was somewhere in there, and all of us have taken anywhere from a 12 to 15% cut in our budget since then, and realizing that even the budget's flat, you gotta absorb fixed costs, so you're actually, it's a degradation in budgets. And I would say that's true of all federal agencies, and certainly with the Great Recession, very true and impacted the state agencies as well. And I don't see that changing at all in the near future, no matter if we're experiencing an administration change or not. It's just the reality of where our budget situation is collectively right now across the federal and state local government. I would say I was having a conversation, I introduced Paul earlier, and I was having a conversation with him at break, and I mentioned the Wildland Fire Leadership Council. We actually, the last meeting was yesterday, and on the agenda was transition. And it's been a very interesting transition to this new administration because he's such a different cavalier individual, so it isn't the norm that we've experienced in past transitions. Although I would say, from a fire perspective, when you look at that leadership council and the membership of that council, whether it's an individual who's going to be leading, like a John Jarvis for us, or somebody who's staying, there's a pretty good, I would say a very strong, not pretty good, but very strong belief in the national PACE strategy and working within that framework and focusing on maintaining that at the local level, tribal level, state level, federal level. And so as we go through a period of uncertainty with transitions are always hard, whether it happens with a new boss or a new president. I think there's really good buy-in that, hey, we can work together collaboratively within this cohesive strategy to, no matter what the budgets are, to work together to address the fire situation and within a land management framework. So I feel good about that.
Just follow up on that very good question that's on everybody's mind. Those of us who pledge allegiance to reality, I think that has to be a kind of unshakable belief, and maybe it's more important now than it was a month ago. If you take the example of climate change, that is a genie that's out of the bottle. It's not going back in, and no amount of political posturing is going to make that go away, if only because the rest of the world, and apparently the majority of our country as well, understands it. So, on one hand, things seem very volatile and dangerous, but on the research community, I believe very strongly we have to keep doing what we're doing and not shy away from talking about things that may be politically inconvenient in the moment. Climate change, obviously, is a big international, global issue. Fire is a little more specific. It's important in some parts of the U.S. and Canada and Mexico, and not so important elsewhere. So we may see some kind of regional pushback, but as we've already seen, the fire policy is very adaptive and evolves, often in response to big challenges. And so it may be we take some more of those. Maybe there's one happening in the Appalachians right now, where people recognize publicly the relationship between persistent drought and those fire events. So I think that all is not darkness, and I think it's perhaps more important than ever that we continue to call it the way we see it and do the research that supports the truth.
I guess I would just add one more piece there. In order for the science to continue to be funded, which I think is a concern in terms of where funding choices get made, we have to make space for what we need. It's not, I'm a huge proponent of fire and getting fire back on the landscape, but I want to do it in a way that's appropriate. And as the climate changes, some of those effects may change as well. And I hope that we will continue as the agencies to ask for and fund that science as well, as we move forward. Because I think that is a concern now and has been for the last several years, and I do worry about our continued ability to fund research.
Thanks. So, Bill, I have a request for you. I'm not exactly sure how many folks are here, but I think there was one other district ranger from the Forest Service. I'm not sure how many superintendents or park leadership. Excuse me. But it'd be great to see these kind of meetings attended by, more line officers, folks like that. So, if there's any way you can do that, help us through travel management or something, I think that would be awesome.
So this is for all of you. I noticed that, I'm a huge advocate of science, but I also noticed that there is already so much science starting to tell us the same things. And I was wondering how you guys feel if we really do need more science, or if we need people to start really talking more about how to apply science to management, and if that's really where our needs are. So, just sparking discussion.
To me, that's like asking if you need your right hand or your left hand. Quite seriously, there may be certain problems that are kind of overworked and settled that we can move on. Science tends to do that. Maybe there's sometimes a little bit of a lag because people have projects in the works, so they want to finish them off and get published. But eventually the science moves on. And I think the expression of that is the emergence of these really critical, unpredictable post-fire transitions during an uncertain climate. That is an area in which the science is, if not in its infancy, toddler stage, right? We really don't know enough about that in order to provide guidance to managers. So to me, that's an example of where science is still relevant. So I guess I would adapt your question, which I fundamentally agree with, to say the science needs to keep up with the problems that are most needed by managers, and we need to make sure that it's tracking those management needs more carefully.
Yeah, I do think that for some questions we know where we're going and we know what we need to do, but in terms of being accountable to the public and being able to articulate whether we're meeting all these objectives that we're going to use to justify how we're moving forward, there's still monitoring and research data that's needed. We get caught sometimes when we're not thinking ahead and thinking about that next question, and that can also slow us down and keep us from moving forward. So I think the more we can come together and talk about what those priority research needs are, particularly in declining funding environment, which has been going on for a while now, that will be the most important thing.
A couple of things to add to what I said earlier, Bill's knowledge, I heard from the others. I mentioned Joint Fire Sciences, and I'm actually on a science policy working group right now where we have to have it done in January, February. We're developing a bunch of mechanisms for the Joint Fire Sciences Program Board to look at, to help decide, okay, what avenues do we need to pursue to help get the message of science across to the policy side of the table. And I forget how many we've developed from a brainstorming session. We articulated it fairly well. I'm not sure what's going to stick. We're actually meeting about it today. I missed a call. You were picking it back up later on in December, a couple weeks away. So that's underway. And I mentioned you all and the role that you play in developing things at the field level, in taking the science as justification for why I want to do things differently, and using it at that local level. I think, I mean, I really, really believe that that's where it comes from. And I worry, you know, with our, remember I said 15% budget cuts, because of having to have people available or thinking that we have to have people available for fire response, it's really affected our fire ecology, our fire effects program, getting that monitoring that is the feedback mechanism for our objectives and our strategy and tactics. We've been fairly innovative, but you can only innovate so far if budgets are decreasing. I would say the same thing with our communication education program, the stories that we tell and articulate for leadership, for policy developers, for the public. It's a concern. We've done some really good creative things, but Michelle Fiddler would tell you, she's maxed out.
John Halliday, Deputy Regional Director for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Navajo Region. What I came for to get out of this, first of all, you know, I think that we've concluded that climate change is real. Second of all, there's so many science projects out there and science looking at different things, which I think is great. But what I was really looking for was, okay, what do I do as an administrator? The Navajo region is larger than the state of West Virginia. We have a huge amount of grazing lands and agricultural, agrarian type community and economy. And I would like to know what we should be doing strategically to prepare for climate change in our grazing policies and range management. I don't remember seeing anybody from the NRCS here. I think it would be great to include those people who are doing grazing plans. And we include those things in our IRMPs. We also have a lot of grazing land or grazing in our forest. And so I would like to see that kind of thing incorporated into climate change policy. Also, we do have a lot of forestry. I would like to know, what do I do? How do I integrate climate change preparation into our forestry plan? So anyway, that's all I have to say.
That's actually a really good point. And when I spoke earlier, I forgot to mention the Park Service's Climate Change Division. And, you know, Kat Hawkins, Greta Sherman, Patrick Gonzalez, people who work in that division, they've done really, really good work. They're working at the local level with individual parks like Grand Canyon, like Yosemite, et cetera. And we've had discussions with them about scenario-based planning and how you take a traditional fire management plan but look at it through the lens of scenario planning that gives you the capability to be adaptive as you're addressing resiliency. And it is very much in the infancy of discussion, I would say, understanding by people like me and others about how you use their expertise to help with land management planning to get at what we're talking about. So there's discussions within the service. I haven't heard a lot of discussions across like the department or other agencies, and I think it's probably just me where I come from. But we're toying with the same issue internal to Park Service.
So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service just less than 2 weeks ago launched their climate change portal, which actually is a resource for all sorts of information, whether it be planning, literature, information, research, ongoing topics in terms of climate change. And I would suggest for those who haven't looked at it yet to look at that if you're looking for information and ideas on how to incorporate climate change into planning information. It's not a one-stop shop yet. It's a process in the making. Timing may have been poor for the launch, or not. But it is a really good resource, and there's a lot of effort that's gone into building it. So if you're interested in that information, I can get that to you as well.
Where is that again?
It's the Fish and Wildlife Service Climate Change Portal. If you search on that, you should find it.
I would just mention one thing that you mentioned NRCS and engaging with NRCS in some of this stuff. NRCS has recently come into an agreement with the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management to fund or half fund 3 positions across northern, northeastern, and northwestern Arizona. Those foresters will be out there working with landowners and working with ranchers in developing plans that can qualify for EQIP. So there's going to be 3 new foresters out there in those 3 regions of Arizona that the NRCS is contributing and the state of Arizona is contributing to really start working on some of those issues. And as far as I know, I think one of those positions